Daniel chapter 8. I told you if for fun you wanted to be doing some other outside reading, and that's where we're going to get to today. We're going to be looking at the Apocrypha and Josephus' works. Not for inspiration, but for history. So that's where we'll be getting towards the end of today. But let me remind you where we're at. Which empire are we with right now in Daniel chapter 8? Belshazzar. And he's the king of... What do y'all think? All right, what's the first kingdom? Babylon. We're still in Babylon. Okay. So Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar. Then next is Medo-Persians. And who were the Medo-Persian kings? Darius and Cyrus. One is Medes, the other is Persians. And they actually ruled a lot of the time at the same time. Two kings, different kingdoms, but ruling the same kingdom. Talk about an interesting way to try to run a country. And that's why there was the disproportionate, like the bear that's lopsided and all those other things we've talked about, because you can't have two countries trying to rule together. It's just not going to ever work well. So we went to Babylon, we went to Medo-Persians, and then we went to what next? Greek. And what was the Greeks represented by in chapter 8 of Daniel? The goat, okay. And what did the goat have grow out of it? A notable horn. And who is the notable horn? Alexander the Great. And then when Alexander the Great dies, what happens? It splits. And so in Daniel chapter 8, what is that talking about? What does it call it? Four horns. So the one horn became four horns. That's talking about when Alexander the Great dies, four generals start running his country. Now, we're going to look at one small horn. Let's see. Verse 9. Daniel chapter 8, verse 9. Out of one of what? One of the four horns. So in other words, the kingdom has been divided into four sections, and out of one of those sections will come a new leader. Let's read about him. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, towards the glorious land. It grew great even to the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offerings were taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression. And it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking. Okay, we'll stop there. So that's everything about that horn in Daniel chapter 8 before we get the interpretation. This is just Daniel telling the dream. But just from his dream, did you pick up on any details that you think you could already interpret about this little horn? What is it going to do? What is this man, this leader, this king, what is he going to do? Stop the sacrifices. So guess what? That gives us a very specific fact. So before we go any further, if you go through history and you find a ruler that stopped sacrifices, that might be the man. Okay, what else was mentioned that he was going to do? Okay, that's good. We got something from there. Now let's get to his interpretation. So Daniel chapter 8, let's look down about verse 22. And if you're following in your notes, I think y'all are around page 68. Is that right on your notes? So around 68 if you're following in your notes. All right, verse 22. And as for the horn that was broken, in its place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. So after Alexander the Great, there's going to become 4 leaders, but they're never going to be as strong as he was. Now let's keep reading. At the latter end of their kingdom, this gives us a time marker. What's the time marker of the little horn? At the end of their kingdom. What kingdom? The kingdom of 4 rulers of Greece. So when we come to the end of the kingdom of 4 rulers of Greece, that's when we're going to have this new guy. At the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit. Now, this is a neat phrase that we find a lot in the Bible. God has limits. Think back to the Promised Land. He tells Israel, before they ever go into Egyptian captivity, stay around 450 years, that I'm going to wait until their transgressions have added up. I'm not giving the exact quote. My mind's not saying the right words. But until their transgressions had gotten too high. So this phraseology we found before in the Bible, in other words, even in kingdoms that are not God's people, He's not going to immediately punish. He's going to wait till they get to a breaking point, till they've went too far, till they're beyond repentance. In people's lives and in kingdoms' lives, people can create and do horrible sins, and they might still come back. They might be in prison, awaiting their death penalty, and decide to finally repent and be baptized. I've seen that. You've heard of it. There was a Netflix documentary recently on a horrible murder that he was taught through correspondence courses, and he was saved. So in kingdoms and in people, God gives us a long rope. He is very, very patient, but there will come a point where it's gotten too bad. And when it gets to that point, then He punishes. So He says that Greece will one day get to that point where He will punish Greece for their sins. And at that time, there will become this man. He says, a king at the later end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. This man is very intelligent. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. Before we even keep reading the interpretation, what do you think from that? His power will be great, but not by his own power. That's right. He's actually not doing this of human power. God's involved. Even though he's about to do some horrible atrocities, it's because God's wanting to finally punish Greece. And His people are soon to repent. But His people, let me rephrase that. Israel is soon to repent, and Greece is soon to be punished. And so God's actually giving the man power to do these last deeds that seal their fate. He's helping the man as the man nails the coffin of their nation. So it says, his power is not from himself. He shall cause fearful destruction and shall succeed in what he does. So God's going to let this man succeed. Succeed in what? He is going to succeed in destroying mighty men and the people who are the saints. This man is going to harm God's people. And God's going to allow him that power. That way He finishes the wickedness of His nation so that they can be punished. That's a difficult concept for us. And if you ask a question right now, I wouldn't be surprised, because it's a hard concept for us to realize that sometimes God will allow and help might be too strong of a word, but that he will let evil people do evil things to bring about something he wants. Now, in this case, it's to bring about their punishment. He's letting them go that last step so that they will finally be punished. And so that last step is, what are they going to do to God's people? They're going to harm them. What did we already find in Daniel's dream without the interpretation? What were they going to do to God's people? They were going to stop the sacrifices. That's a major sin. All right, let's keep reading. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken. Okay, let's pause there, because in our dream, what did it say about the prince? Verse 11. It became great, even as great as the Prince of Hosts. That hurt my heart when I read that, because you say to yourself, and we haven't got into the interpretation yet, you may not know who the Prince of Hosts is. God, the Prince of the heavenly host. You say, how could someone become as great as the Prince of heavenly host? Well, he is trying to rise up to be an equal to God, but luckily in the interpretation we're told it doesn't actually happen. What happens to him? He shall rise up against the Prince of Princes, and he shall be broken, not by human hands. So he's going to keep trying to get stronger and more powerful and think that he is like God, but what happens when he finally gets to that point? God breaks him, not by human hands, verse 25. So God's going to allow him to just keep growing and doing more and more strength and more wickedness until finally God breaks him and breaks the nation. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. That helps us too. We are what time period right now in this chapter? We're way up in Belshazzar's time period. I'm going to get my little pointer. We're way in Belshazzar's time period. We're still in the what kingdom? Not yet. Babylon. We haven't even went to the Medes and Persians, and we haven't even went to Greece. So God says, seal this vision, because it's a long time from now before it's going to happen. So remember in the book of Revelation when we got to the end, chapter 22, and when we looked at chapter 1, it said don't seal the vision because it's coming. So when God's saying seal the vision, He's saying this is going to be a long time before the vision is fulfilled. It's not talking to the people alive today. It's talking to people for a long time from now.
2,300 evenings and mornings?
Yes, verse 14. 2,300 evenings and mornings. And I told y'all I wasn't going to give you a lot of the interpretation last week just yet, but 2,300 evenings and mornings is about 6 1/3 years. I'll give you a prophetical interpretation without giving you a historical interpretation. We're going to get to the historical in a second. Prophecy. What is 6 or 666? Bad. It's something that pretends to be like God or wants to be on the level of God. What did we just say this man wanted to be? He wanted to be on the level with the Prince of Princes, but he's not the real thing. And so it's something that pretends to be 7, but is not 7. Now, historical, there's an actual number we're going to get to in a minute with the man we're going to talk about. No, I did not try to do that. My kindergartners are getting excited. That's all the rage in elementary school right now. I actually saw the Prime Minister of UK was visiting an elementary school, and he made a 6-7 joke, and the teacher got on to the Prime Minister. She said, "That's not allowed in our school." And he was like, "I'm sorry, Mom." So when you're a school teacher and you're able to get on to the Prime Minister, you got guts. So now let's get into the interpretation, the third line if you're taking notes. Alexander died suddenly of a fever in 323 at age what? 33 years old. 4 kings took over in his place that was also prophesied in Daniel chapter 7, verse 6. But today we're going to get to the little horn. The little horn that came out of them is Antiochus Epiphanes. To be more exact, Antiochus the Fourth. Some preachers just call him Antiochus. We need to be, I'm nitpicking. But you got to be careful just saying Antiochus, because even in Josephus, the second he dies, there's another Antiochus. So Antiochus, there's a lot of Antiochuses. So specifically, we're talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. So I'm going to read to you from some of these readings. And I'd given you the book, chapter, and verses there in case you wanted to look them up. But then when I was trying to find it today, I couldn't find it under those book, chapter, and verses. So I'm going to give you a better book, chapter, and verse. So Josephus, book number, let me go back. I know it's chapter 5, but let me see what book it is. Book 12. So Josephus, book 12, chapter 5 will be our first reading. Josephus, book 12, chapter 5. Yeah, go ahead, Kendall. Explain who he was. He was a historian. He was a Jewish historian. He sometimes exaggerated. He talks about Jesus. He talks about John the Baptizer. He has a whole section on Daniel that I was actually looking at today, but he also sometimes exaggerates because he's always going to make things look the best for the Jews. He is... What year did he live? First century, that's what I thought. So you're right around the time of Jesus that these histories were being written. Histories, you know. History is always written by the people that win the wars, right? So some of it's exaggerated, but it does help us because it's the closest history we have on a lot of these things from the Jewish perspective. So Josephus, book number 12, chapter number 5. Let me read to you some of this. Now it came to pass after 2 years, in the 145th year, on the 25th day of the month, which is by us called Chasleah, and by the Macedonians Apollos, in the 153rd Olympiad, I should have skipped the date, that the king came up to Jerusalem pretending peace. He got possession of the city by treachery, at which time he spared not so much as those that admitted him into it on account of the riches that lay in the temple, but led by his covetous inclination, for he saw there was in it a great deal of gold and many ornaments that had been dedicated to it of great value, and in order to plunder its wealth, he ventured in to break the league he had made. Pause there. He made a league with the Jews, and he acted like he was in peace with them, Antiochus Epiphanes. He acted like he wasn't coming to attack them. He just wanted to come into their city. Then as soon as he gets in the city, even the people that let him in, he kills. He kills everyone because he had heard of the great riches in the temple, and he was wanting to plunder the temple of God. So he left the temple bare and took away the golden candlesticks and the golden altar of incense and the table of shewbread and the altar of burnt offerings, and did not abstain from even the veils, which are made out of fine linen and scarlet. I didn't realize that anyone had ever plundered the veils. He even stole the veils, the giant expensive curtains. He also emptied it of its secret treasures and left nothing at all of the remaining, and by this means cast the Jews into great lamentation, for he forbid them to offer the daily sacrifices which they used to offer to God according to the law. What was the one easiest thing, because out of everything, y'all picked up on one thing. What was the one easiest thing in Daniel's original dream that this little horn was going to do? Stop the sacrifices. This man came hundreds of years later and did it. He stopped the sacrifices, and he goes further than that. According to the law, and the inhabitants he slew, some he carried captive together with their wives and children, so that the multitude of those captives that were taken alive amounted to about 10,000. He also burnt down the finest building. When he had overthrown the city walls, he built a citadel in the lower part of the city, for the place was high and overlooked the temple, on which account he fortified it with high walls and towers, and put into it a garrison of Macedonians. However, so he builds a citadel right by the temple because it's the highest place in the city to try to keep control of the people. However, in that citadel dwelt the impious and wicked part of the Jewish multitude, from whom it proved that the citizens suffered many and sore calamities. So he gets the worst of the Jews and lets them move in his area to help him keep control of the rest of the Jews. Now, there was the first major sin. First major sin was he stopped worship. That was mentioned by Daniel. Here's the second one. And when the king had built an altar, an idol altar upon God's altar, okay, that's the second one. And that was mentioned, Daniel had already alluded to that. He not only stopped worship, he offered idolatrous worship on God's altar. So he not only stopped Jewish worship of God, he used God's altar for idolatrous worship. Here's the third thing. And all three of these I think you can see hints of in Daniel chapter 8. He slew swine upon it, and so offered a sacrifice neither according to the law nor the Jewish religious worship in that country. And he compelled them to forsake the worship which they paid their own God, and to adore those whom he took to be gods. He made temples and raised idol altars in every city and every village, and offered swine. So, Antiochus Epiphanes not only stopped worship, not only started offering idolatrous worship on God's altar, he killed pigs on God's altar. Now, that is extremely sinful for a Jewish person. As I was studying for the book, it's kind of funny how the three books have intertwined. As I was studying for Hebrews chapter 11, and then as I was studying for Revelation, they both mention Antiochus Epiphanes too. Because what happened in Hebrews chapter 11, at the end where it talks about how prophets were killed, they were sawn in two, and the King James even adds a word there, it says they were tempted. ESV doesn't have the word tempted, but the word tempted means that they were tempted to forsake their faith to save their lives. Everyone kept going back to Antiochus Epiphanes when they were talking about that section of Hebrews 11, talking about the things that happened between the Old Testament and the New Testament. There was this horrible story that I read, and it would take us most of class to read it because it's very long, but their history from 1 Maccabees, so it may be accurate, may not be accurate, tells of Antiochus Epiphanes where there's a mother who has 7 sons. He brings the first son in with the mother, actually brings all 7 sons in with the mother, and he asked the first son, the oldest, who starts with the oldest, and asks him to eat pig fat and cooks or pig skin and cooks it. And he tells them to bring in these giant boiling pots, and as soon as the first son says no, he starts frying him in front of the other children, cuts off his hands, cuts off his feet, and fries him. And then goes to son number 2. And he asks him, will you eat the pig fat? And when he does it, he goes through all these barbaric things. And it's not even the same form of torture. Every child a different torture. One, he cuts off their hands and feet. One, he cuts out their tongue as soon as they refuse to. And he goes through this horrible torture, and he starts at the oldest son, working his way down, trying to get each one of them to deny God and eat pig fat. And finally he gets to the last son, and the last son, he asks him, will you eat the fat? And he said, I deserve and my nation deserves the punishment we're receiving right now because we did not obey God. But you are going to receive a punishment, and we will resurrect to life, and you will not resurrect to life. And then he killed him. And then he turned to mom and asked her to eat pig fat and killed her. So that's the kind of stuff this man was doing. And that's just one example. There's so many examples of the Jews giving up their life because they refused to worship the way this man wanted them to worship. That's what's happening between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so when you get to Hebrews chapter 11 and he says, remember the faith, they may be remembering people from the Old Testament. They may also be remembering the people between the Testaments too. There's a lot of examples of people that gave their life for God not written in the Bible between the time periods. So this is the guy that Daniel was predicting about in Daniel chapter 8. He stopped worship. He tried to get them to worship incorrectly, and he fought against God. He was trying to become like God. Let's see. Okay, let me fill in your blanks for you. This little horn that came out of them is Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes, First Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 10, and Josephus Antiquities, chapter 10, which is not actually chapter 10, it's chapter 5, I think I told you, of book 12. So that was a mistake. Was its first king. I'm trying to make sure y'all have all your blanks filled in. Was there a blank there, guys? Oh, here you go. Yep. If you miss a blank, just ask me and I'll repeat it. So let's go to Maccabees now. First Maccabees. And I actually redid my research today, so I found some things a little different than I originally have quoted there. I had First Maccabees 1:10. I'm going to read from First Maccabees 14, I think. Let me see. I'll try 1:10. Let's go to First Maccabees 1:10. Sometimes I don't know what I was thinking in my notes. So if it's not 1:10, we'll try the other one. Yeah, it mentions him in 1:10, so we'll read it there. First Maccabees 1:10, from them came forth a sinful root, Antiochus Epiphanes, son of King Antiochus. He had been a hostage in Rome. He began to reign in the year 137 year of the kingdom of the Greeks. Okay. Let's go back to our notes now. This horn comes from Seleucids, one of its first kings. Alexander the Great was the founder of the empire, and Seleucid was one of the four. From that one of the four came Antiochus Epiphanes. In the book of Daniel, it says there is going to be one horn, the one horn split into four horns, and from that one small horn. So Antiochus Epiphanes came from the Seleucid side of the kingdom. In 334, Alexander, I told y'all last week I should have never printed on double-sided paper. That's confusing me. All right. The four kings, we already looked at that. The four kings were, south was Egypt, east was Babylon. Particularly in Babylon, the leader is Elamaeus and Armenia. The beautiful land is the land of promise, which is Palestine, God's land. And if you want quotes for that, Daniel, Jeremiah, Ezekiel would show you that Palestine is what we're talking about when we say the beautiful land. So it grew up to the host of heaven. It cast down some of those hosts, some of the stars, to the ground and trampled them. The host of the heaven is a name for God. It's a name for God. He harmed the people of God, and he was trying to fight against God. A wickedness against God and his people. Now, when you talk about the host of heaven, sometimes stars, when you're in prophecy, stars can mean princes or kings. So it could be saying he was attacking God's princes and God's kings. But we don't really need to worry about the details. The important thing is he was fighting against God. He was trying to take down God. a wickedness against God and a wickedness against his people. And I referenced here Genesis 22:17. Every week I wind up studying way further, think I'm going to go faster, and I always go too slow. We'll get through this, guys, I promise. And if I'm going too slow, y'all tell me. I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. Your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. And what was he doing? He was casting down the stars. Those children of God, the Israelites. And maybe specifically the princes or the leaders of the Israelites. The host of heaven is the name for God. He was attacking his people. He raised himself up against God, the prince of the host, and he forbade. Y'all's notes have forbid. By the next time I print this, I changed it to forbade. Sorry, bad English. He forbade the worship of God and desecrated the place of worship. 1 Maccabees 1:45. And we already read it from Josephus. But 1 Maccabees 1:45. To forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuaries, to profane Sabbaths and festivals, to defile the sanctuary and the priests, to build altars and sacred precincts and to shrines for idols, to sacrifice swine and other unclean things, and to leave their sons uncircumcised. So he forbade everything you could think of that's part of being a Jew. You can't circumcise your sons. You can't worship God. We're going to cook swine on the altar. Everything that's wrong for a Jew. And what did the host of heaven do to him in verse, 25? What did the host of heaven do to him? He broke him, and not by human hands. Well, the Jews believe his death was miraculous. 2 Maccabees 9, which we don't have time for the whole chapter, but I'll try to read you an excerpt here. Oh, I actually want to read this from Josephus instead. Josephus, book 12, chapter 9. Maccabees chapter 9. That synced up. That probably doesn't happen often. Josephus, book 12, chapter 9, tells about Antiochus' death. Here's what it says. He hears that he is not winning a war. And when he was grieving for his disappointment, some persons told him of the defeat of his commanders whom he had left behind to fight against Judea, and what strength the Jews had already gotten. When this concern about these affairs, so he's not winning, the Jews are actually fighting back and winning. And when he hears about these affairs to the former, he was confounded, and by the anxiety he was in, he fell into a distemper, which as it lasted a great while, and as his pains increased upon him, so at length perceived he should die in a little time. I don't know what medical condition we would call that, but he was overwhelmed with stress and anxiety of knowing he's losing battles to the Jews. And he says, I know I'm dying. Something is happening to him. And he calls his friends and he told them, now this is Josephus and he does exaggerate sometimes, but we're not going to have a more accurate history, so we got to kind of somewhat trust this. That this distemper was severe upon him, and he confessed with all that this calamity was sent upon him for the miseries he had brought upon the Jewish nation, while he had plundered their temple and condemned their God. And when he said this, he gave up the ghost. So according to Josephus, he was stressed out and anxious and knew he was dying, and he calls his friends and tells them, I know this is because of what I did to their God. And then he gives up the ghost. If that's accurate, that would definitely be neat. The Jews did believe he was killed by miracle. Daniel prophesied he'd be killed not by human hand. So God was involved in his death. How exactly that happened, best we can guess as something accurate to whatever Josephus or Maccabees tells us. The other sin that he committed, verse 13 of Daniel 8, he messes up concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes it desolate, and the giving over the sanctuary host to be trampled underfoot. That could be referencing to the killing of pigs on the altar, but it also could be he built an altar to Zeus in the temple, where God's altar used to be. So he's not only offering pigs, he's also offering two idols to Zeus. And 1 Maccabees 1, 56 to 58 references that. Did I have another page for y'all? No? Good. Oh, approximately blank years. That's where I was wanting to get to before we ended today. And I don't see it in my notes, so I'm just going to tell you the answer off the top of my head, and I'm pretty sure I'm right. Approximately 6.5 years. The period of Antiochus' reign of terror in Jerusalem is about 6.5 years. It's not 7. Prophecy. Prophecy gave us a number that's 6 years and 1/3 months. History, that somewhat exaggerates and sometimes unreliable, tells us 6.5 years. So from the time he took over Jerusalem and started terrorizing God's people is around 6.5 years. Daniel gave us to the amount of days that God said it would be, and which is about 6 1/3 years. So he ruined the worship, messed up the altar, predicted, came through one of the 4 generals, predicted, and the amount of days that Daniel predicts, if I'm going to have to pick a 3-month leniency one way or the other, I'm going to pick Daniel instead of these histories. So that was predicted. So does 6.5 mean something? 6 1/3 mean something? Well, one thing, it means it's not 7. But another, which means it's not going to last forever. God's enemies cannot hurt us forever. Wicked nations cannot harm us forever. They are not 7. They are only a version of 6. They can look like God, but they are not God. They can look like they're going to hurt us forever, but they're not going to hurt us forever. But historically, it may be the exact amount of days that he had taken over Jerusalem. Judas Maccabeus says that December 14th was when they finally took back Jerusalem. At the 6.5 year mark, they rededicated the temple. Now that could be where you get your little bit of difference, is from the time he stops reigning to the time they rededicate the temple may take a little while. Do you know why that's important? What's December 14th when they rededicated the temple? What do we call that today? Hanukkah. So on December 14th, it's coming very soon, when you hear about Hanukkah, what it's talking about is this. It's talking about what Daniel predicted, what Antiochus Epiphanes did, where he attacked God's people for so long, and then they finally won. They won the battle, and he died, and they got back their country for a little while. And they got to worship God correctly. And so every year, they have Hanukkah to remember when they beat Antiochus Epiphanes and when they finally got to worship God scripturally again. Hanukkah is not talked about in the Bible, but the Bible does talk about all the events around Hanukkah, just not the holiday of it. The events of God beating the enemy. It wasn't them, because what did that verse tell us in Daniel? It was not by human hand. The Jews love Maccabees because they're the ones that deliver them. It wasn't Maccabees that delivered them, it was God. So, we're going to talk more about Hanukkah in a year from now, if the Lord gives me the time to preach then, okay? But when Hanukkah comes up in a few weeks, just remember, that's what you were studying about in Daniel. That God predicted he would punish this man, he would break the man when he did these horrible deeds to his people. So it wasn't Maccabees that did it. That was the human hand. God was behind it.